Sometimes life has a way of ripping everything you thought you knew right out from under you. My heart was still shattered from losing my husband, but nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for the sickening twist of my sister's baby shower. She stood there, pregnant, and publicly declared my late husband was the father of her baby. Then she demanded half of everything he left me. What happened next? Oh, you are absolutely not going to believe it. 6 months before all this blew up, my entire world exploded. One minute I was Karen, 32, happily married, planning our future, maybe even talking about starting our own family. The next, I was a widow, drowning in a blur of grief, picking out cremation options because James's body, it was just too damaged. The first few weeks were a fog of funeral arrangements, endless sympathy calls, and nights I just couldn't sleep. If my parents hadn't stepped in to handle everything, I honestly don't know how I would have managed. Karen, honey, we've arranged everything with a funeral home. My mom had said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. You just focus on yourself right now. A support group for people who lost loved ones became my lifeline. Every Tuesday evening, I'd sit in a circle with strangers who understood that hollow ache in my chest. Some days are harder than others. I shared once, my voice barely a whisper. Sometimes I wake up and for a split second, I forget he's gone. Maria, who'd lost her husband 2 years prior, reached over and squeezed my hand. That's normal, sweetie. The grief comes in waves. As the months passed, I slowly started to deal with the practical stuff. James had left me surprisingly well off. Our house in the suburbs, an apartment downtown, a substantial bank account. I could have quit my job at the marketing firm, but the thought of sitting alone in our empty house all day made my skin crawl. Instead, I switched to part-time, just enough to keep my mind occupied. The most surprising change was my relationship with my parents. Growing up, I'd always felt like an afterthought compared to my younger sister, Sarah. They never missed her dance recitals or school plays, while my academic achievements barely warranted a congratulations. But after James's death, something shifted. They seemed genuinely concerned, attentive. When they asked if I could help them out financially with a monthly transfer of $1,500, I agreed without hesitation. The weekly dinners at their house became a comforting ritual. Mom would cook her famous pot roast, Dad would pour the wine, and we'd actually talk. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had their full attention. Karen, tell us more about that new project you're working on, Dad would say, actually interested. The marketing campaign's going well, I'd share, savoring these rare moments of connection. My boss thinks it might bring in several new clients. But everything shifted the night Sarah joined us for dinner. She walked in, 7 months pregnant, her presence immediately commanding the room, like it always had. She'd been living in a rented apartment across town, and I hadn't seen her since James's funeral. Sarah, sweetie, sit here. Mom fussed, practically pushing me aside to make room for her favorite daughter. Do you need another pillow? Are your feet swollen? Just like that, I became invisible again. It was like watching a switch flip. Suddenly, all their attention laser-focused on Sarah and her pregnancy. The familiar ache of being overlooked settled back into my chest, an old friend I'd foolishly thought I'd left behind. So, who's the father? I asked during dinner, trying to join the conversation. Have you told him about the baby? Sarah's face darkened. That's my business, she snapped, pushing her peas around her plate. I don't need to share every detail of my personal life. Mom jumped to her defense immediately. Karen, don't pry. Your sister doesn't have to explain herself to anyone. I couldn't help but notice how different this response was from when I was going through fertility treatments. Back then, they had no problem demanding updates and offering unsolicited advice about my personal life. But how are you planning to manage on your own? I pressed during another dinner, watching her heap seconds onto her plate. Babies are expensive. Sarah waved her hand dismissively, that familiar smirk playing on her lips. Don't worry about my baby. We won't need anything from anyone. I've got it all figured out. I really should have paid more attention to that mysterious smile, but I'd seen it too many times before. Sarah was always cooking up get-rich-quick schemes that never panned out. The organic smoothie business that lasted 2 weeks, the life coaching certification she never finished, the cryptocurrency investment that lost her 3 months' rent. "Trust me," she said, patting her belly with an air of confidence that should have set off every alarm bell. "This time, everything's going to work out exactly as planned." Dad beamed at her like she'd just announced a cure for cancer. That's my girl, always landing on her feet. I took another bite of pot roast, trying to swallow down the familiar feeling of being second best. Some things never change, I thought, watching my parents hang on Sarah's every word. The call from Sarah came on a Tuesday morning. I was at my desk, reviewing marketing reports, when my phone lit up with her name. I almost let it go to voicemail. Our conversations were usually brief and awkward, but something made me answer. Karen. Her voice had that sugary sweetness she only used when she wanted something. "I'm having my baby shower next weekend at Mom and Dad's. I'd really love it if you could come." The invitation caught me off guard. The last real conversation we'd had was at James's funeral, and even then, she'd seemed distracted and uncomfortable. "Are you sure?" I asked, unable to hide my surprise. I could count on one hand the number of times Sarah had voluntarily included me in anything. "Of course," she laughed, the sound oddly forced. "You're my only sister. It wouldn't be right without you. Plus, I have something special planned." Something in her tone made my stomach clench, but I pushed the feeling aside. "I'll be there," I promised, already mentally listing possible gift ideas. Maybe this was her way of trying to bridge the gap between us. The following Saturday, I arrived at my parents' house carrying 2 carefully wrapped packages, a high-end baby monitor and a handmade blanket. Despite our differences, this was my future niece or nephew. The place looked like a pastel explosion had hit it, pink and blue balloons everywhere, streamers hanging from every surface, and a towering diaper cake centerpiece. Trust Sarah to turn this into an event, I thought. She'd invited what looked like half the town. Aunt Margaret with her daughters, Mom's bridge club friends, Sarah's old college roommates. "Time for games," Sarah announced, wading through the crowd in a flowing maternity dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She was glowing, but there was something predatory in her smile that made me uneasy. Her eyes kept finding mine across the room, holding my gaze a beat too long, like she was waiting for something. We played all the traditional baby shower games, measuring Sarah's belly with string, guessing the baby's birth date, that horrible melted chocolate bar in a diaper game. I even won the belly measuring contest, which seemed to irritate Sarah more than it should have. Throughout it all, she kept shooting these strange looks my way. After the gifts were opened, Sarah cooing over each onesie and baby gadget with theatrical enthusiasm, she reached my presence. She held up the blanket, running her fingers over the intricate pattern. Then she clinked her glass for attention. The room fell silent, and my heart started racing, for no reason I could name. The air felt suddenly thick, hard to breathe. "I want to thank everyone for coming today," she began, one hand resting on her swollen belly. "But there's something else I need to share. I think it's time everyone knew who the father of my baby is." My heart started pounding. Sarah's eyes locked onto mine, and in that moment I knew. I knew before the words even left her mouth, but that didn't lessen the impact. "The father," she said, her voice ringing through the suddenly silent room, "is James Wilson, Karen's late husband." The world tilted sideways. Through the roaring in my ears, I could hear gasps and whispers from the guests. Aunt Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. Sarah's college friends huddled closer, whispering frantically. But what hit me hardest was the lack of surprise on my parents' faces. They had known, all along. Before I could even process what was happening, Sarah was speaking again, her voice dripping with satisfaction as she turned to face me directly. "And as James's baby, his only heir, I'm entitled to half of everything he left you, Karen. The house, the apartment, the money. My child deserves their father's inheritance." The room spun. I gripped the back of a chair to steady myself. But then Mom and Dad stepped forward, flanking Sarah like bodyguards. "Karen," Dad said, using his stern business voice, "you need to do the right thing here. Your nephew deserves his father's legacy." I found my voice, though it came out as a rasp. You're lying. All of you are lying. James would never. Oh no. Sarah's smile turned cruel as she pulled out her phone. Then how do you explain these? She held up the screen, and my world collapsed all over again. There they were, James and Sarah, wrapped in each other's arms, kissing in what looked like a hotel room. Another photo showed them holding hands in a restaurant I didn't recognize. He loved me, Sarah declared, her voice carrying across the silent room. He was planning to leave you for me. We were going to tell everyone, but then... She choked up, tears streaming down her face. Then the accident happened, and all our plans. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. My body moved on autopilot, gathering my purse, pushing past the whispering guests, stumbling out to my car. I heard Mom calling after me, but I was already backing out of the driveway. The drive home was a blur. My mind kept replaying those photos, trying to make sense of them. The restaurant photos must have been taken during those business dinners he claimed to have. The hotel, probably during his frequent work trips. My phone started buzzing as soon as I walked through my front door. Sarah was sending messages. Dozens of them. Screenshots of conversations between her and James. I don't love her anymore. I haven't for a long time. We'll tell everyone after the divorce. You're the only one I want to be with. I can't wait to start our life together. Message after message appeared on my screen, each one a fresh knife in my heart. The timestamps showed conversations going back months. My husband, my sister, plotting their future while I underwent fertility treatments, believing I was the problem in our marriage. I spent that night pacing through my house, touching James's things, wondering if everything about our life together had been a lie. The first call from my parents came at 7 a.m. sharp. I let it ring 4 times before answering. Karen, you need to be reasonable about this, Dad started, not even bothering with a greeting. The sooner you agree to split the inheritance, the easier this will be for everyone. The casual arrogance in his voice made my blood boil. Easier for whom? I barely managed. For Sarah? For you? For all of us. Mom chimed in. I was on speakerphone. You don't want this to get messy, dear. When did you know about them? The words came out as barely more than a whisper. There was a pause, the kind of hesitation that tells you everything you need to know before a word is spoken. We've known for a while, Mom finally admitted. James confided in us about 6 months before. Well, before the accident. The timeline hit me like a physical blow. 6 months. They'd known for 6 months and still let me cry on their shoulders at his funeral, still accepted my money every month while knowing what he and Sarah had done. Traitors. The word fell cold and final on my tongue. All of you. I hung up and blocked their numbers. My hand shook as I opened my banking app, but I didn't hesitate to cancel the monthly transfer to their account. Let them ask their precious Sarah for money. 2 weeks passed in a fog of missed calls and ignored text messages. Then came Sarah's email. She'd sue me if I didn't voluntarily give up half of everything. The word voluntarily had never looked so much like a curse. I couldn't bear to reply. Couldn't bear to think about James's betrayal, about how many people must have known, must have seen them together while I remained oblivious. The whispers at work became unbearable, pitying looks from some colleagues, barely concealed smirks from others. Tom, my boss, and one of the few true friends I had left, called me into his office after I broke down in the middle of a client meeting. Take some time off, he said gently. Paid or unpaid. Whatever works for you. Your job will be here when you're ready to come back. I nodded, grateful, and packed at my desk that same day. The next few weeks blurred together as I became a hermit in my own home. I had groceries delivered, ignored the doorbell when it rang, and spent hours staring at old photos, trying to spot the signs I must have missed. Every happy memory now felt like a mockery. Every moment of our marriage tainted by the knowledge that he had been living a double life with my own sister. The news came via Facebook. Sarah had given birth to a boy. The photo showed her beaming in a hospital bed, our parents hovering proudly over their new grandson. The baby was wrapped in the cream-colored blanket I had knitted for the shower, which felt like a deliberate jab. I closed the app before I could read the comments, but not before noticing she'd named him James Jr. A week later, the court summons arrived in a thick manila envelope. My hands trembled as I opened it, already knowing what I'd find inside. Sarah was suing for half of everything James had left me, claiming her son's right to his father's inheritance. The legal language was cold and precise, laying out her demands in stark black and white. She wanted the house, half the money, and partial ownership of the downtown apartment. I spent 3 days researching lawyers before settling on Richard Martinez, who came highly recommended for handling complex inheritance cases. "Miss Wilson," he said, shuffling through the papers on his desk, his expression carefully neutral. "I have to be honest with you. Your sister has compelling evidence of a long-term relationship with your late husband. Text messages, photos, witness statements, including your own parents." He paused, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. In inheritance cases like this, proof of an intimate relationship combined with a biological child, well, the courts tend to be sympathetic. I was still processing this devastating news when my phone rang that evening. Unknown number. "Hello, is this Karen Wilson?" A woman's voice, unfamiliar, but somehow striking a chord of recognition. Something in the cadence, the tone, made my heart skip. "I'm Elizabeth Parker, James's mother." The world tilted sideways. I gripped the kitchen counter for support. "That's impossible," I whispered. "James was an orphan. He told me his parents died when he was young." Another one of his lies, I'm afraid. Her voice was bitter, but not unkind. "Would you be willing to meet with me? There are things you need to know. Things that might help you." We arranged to meet at a small cafe downtown the next morning, neutral ground. I arrived early, my stomach in knots, ordered a coffee I couldn't drink, and nearly dropped the cup when she walked in. The resemblance was uncanny. James had her eyes, her smile, even the way she carried herself. She moved with the same fluid grace I'd always admired in him. "I was at the funeral," she said, after we'd settled into a corner booth, far from curious ears. Back row, black dress and veil. I couldn't bring myself to approach you then. James and I hadn't spoken in years. I remembered her suddenly, the solitary figure who'd slipped out before the service ended. I'd been too lost in my own grief to wonder who she was, but now the memory crystallized with perfect clarity. The elegant woman in black, standing apart from the other mourners, her face hidden behind a dark veil. "Why are you coming forward now?" I asked, trying to keep the suspicion out of my voice. After all the recent revelations about James, I found it hard to trust anything or anyone connected to him. Elizabeth reached into her handbag and pulled out a manila envelope, worn at the edges as if it had been carried around for a long time. "Because I've heard about what your sister is claiming. And because, despite everything, I can't let another woman suffer from my son's lies." Her fingers trembled slightly as she slid the envelope across the table. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope Elizabeth had given me. Inside were medical records from Boston General Hospital, dated 10 years ago, about a year before James and I got married. My eyes scanned the document, and I felt the blood drain from my face. Complete azoospermia. Permanently sterile. No possibility of natural conception. The clinical terms jumped out at me, each one a fresh blow. "James had these tests done when he was 25, Elizabeth explained softly. "He was devastated by the results. It was one of the last things we discussed before our falling out." I couldn't speak. All those years of fertility treatments, the endless doctor's appointments, the hormone injections, the tears and self-blame, it had all been a cruel charade. James knew he couldn't have children. The courtroom was packed on the day of the hearing. Sarah sat in the front row, cradling baby James Jr., while our parents flanked her protectively. She dressed the part of the grieving, almost widow perfectly, demure black dress, minimal makeup, practiced look of sorrow. When she took the stand, she played to the gallery masterfully, tears glistening in her eyes as she described her great love with James. "All I want is what's fair for my son," she declared, her voice breaking. "He deserves his father's legacy." My lawyer, Mr. Martinez, waited until she'd finished her performance before he spoke. Your Honor, I'd like to submit evidence that proves Miss Thompson's entire claim is fraudulent. He approached the bench with the hospital records. The judge reviewed the documents, her expression unchanging. Sarah's lawyer jumped up, objecting about chain of custody and document authenticity. Sarah's composure cracked. "Those documents are fake," she shrieked, clutching the baby closer. "She forged them to steal my baby's inheritance." Your Honor, Mr. Martinez continued calmly, "Given these medical records show Mr. Wilson was sterile, we request a DNA test to establish paternity." Sarah's smile was triumphant. "That's impossible. James was an orphan, and his body was cremated. There's no one to test against." "Actually," Mr. Martinez said, gesturing to the gallery, "I'd like to introduce Elizabeth Parker, James Wilson's biological mother." Elizabeth stood, and a murmur ran through the courtroom. Even from where I sat, I could see Sarah's face turn ashen. "I'm willing to submit to a DNA test," Elizabeth announced clearly, "to determine if this child is my grandson." The judge nodded. "DNA testing is ordered. We'll reconvene when the results are available." Sarah swayed slightly in her seat, all color drained from her face. Our mother rushed to support her, shooting me a venomous look. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt hope. The courtroom was silent as the judge opened the envelope containing the DNA test results. Sarah sat rigidly in her chair, the baby sleeping peacefully in her arms, unaware of the drama unfolding around him. "The results conclusively show," the judge announced, her voice clear and firm, "that there is no genetic relationship between the minor child and Mrs. Elizabeth Parker. Therefore, it can be concluded that James Wilson was not the father of this child." A collective gasp filled the room. Sarah's face crumpled as she began to sob, mascara running down her cheeks. "Miss Thompson," the judge's voice had turned stern, "would you care to explain why you perpetrated this fraud upon the court?" Sarah clutched the baby closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was seeing several men at the time. When James died and was cremated, I thought no one would ever know. He had money, and I needed." "So you attempted to defraud your own sister?" The judge's disapproval was palpable. "Used your parents as unwitting accomplices in this scheme." "I just wanted security for my baby," Sarah whimpered, but her performance had lost its power. Even our parents looked stunned, finally realizing the extent of her deception. The judge's ruling was swift and unequivocal. "This court finds in favor of the defendant, Karen Wilson. All claims to James Wilson's estate by Sarah Thompson are dismissed with prejudice. Miss Thompson, you are fortunate that Mrs. Wilson hasn't pressed criminal charges for attempted fraud." Outside the courthouse, my parents approached me. Mom was crying, Dad looking older than I'd ever seen him. "Karen, sweetheart." Mom reached for my hand. "We had no idea Sarah was lying. We can make this right. We've been struggling since you stopped the monthly transfers." I held up my hand. "Don't. Just don't." I pulled out my phone, blocked their numbers right there, and walked away without looking back. Elizabeth was waiting by my car. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. I surprised myself by laughing. "You know what? I think I actually am. Or I will be." I took a deep breath. "I've been thinking, that apartment downtown that James left me, I never liked it much. Too many memories. But maybe you'd like it." Her eyes widened. "Karen, no. I couldn't possibly." "Please," I insisted. "You gave me back my life with those medical records. Let me give you something in return." When I handed her the keys a week later, she broke down crying. "I never thought I'd have a daughter," she whispered as she hugged me. "That was 3 months ago. My biological family still tries to reach me through mutual friends and distant relatives, but I've cut those ties too." Sarah sent a letter claiming she's changed, that she's sorry, that she needs help with the baby. I threw it away unopened. Instead, I have weekly dinners with Elizabeth. We're getting to know each other, sharing stories about James, the good and the bad. She's helping me see that while he wasn't the man I thought he was, that doesn't invalidate all the happy moments we shared. Yesterday, I finally packed away James's remaining things. Elizabeth helped me donate some to charity and store others in the attic. As we worked, She told me stories about James as a little boy, before the lies began. It helped, somehow, to know that version of him existed. I'm not ready to date yet, but I've started living again. I returned to work full-time, joined a hiking club, and I'm planning my first solo vacation. Sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I barely recognize the woman looking back at me. Life has a way of surprising you. I lost the family I was born into, but gained a new one I never expected. It's not the life I planned, but maybe it's the life I was meant to have all along. This journey, it changed everything for me. It broke my heart, but it also rebuilt me stronger. I had to choose myself. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to make that kind of difficult choice, to put your own well-being first, even if it meant cutting ties with those you thought were family? Tell me your stories in the comments below.